Hello, everybody. This is Steve Yoder. Welcome to week 3 in Legal Studies 457, 557 here in the spring of 2023 at the UAB Collat School of Business. We're really getting into the meat of the course here. Contract law, I think, could be correctly identified as one of the meatiest sections of the course, certainly a topic that the CPA examiners will expect you as CPAs to be familiar with, and therefore they will certainly test on that on the CPA exam. But let's go ahead and get started. First, here is the answer to last week's extra credit opportunity. This is closed now. When President Biden attempted the first time to forgive student debt, he used the HEROES Act. That was the name of the law, and in the first week of the course, if you identified the name of that law, I gave you 2 points added to your first exam, to be added to your first exam. But in week 2, we were talking about using the court system, navigating the court system, and the concept of standing is very important to getting into court. And going back to that student loan forgiveness case, the question was whether the private borrowers who sued President Biden for not forgiving their loans when they forgave other student loans, did those private borrowers have standing? And the answer is no, they did not have standing. If you gave me that answer, I will add 2 points to your first exam. Our learning activities consist of first 3 sets of PowerPoint slides that you can see in the learning activities when you go to Canvas. The law of contracts is vitally important because we make promises every day, we get promises every day, and we expect those promises to happen. And that's what the law of contract does. They provide stability, predictability. If we never knew if a promise had to be fulfilled, the world, including the business world, would descend into chaos. This week we are looking at the law of contracts called the common law of contract, general contract law. This is mainly for the law of services and real estate, and it's the strictest area of contract law. The rules for contracts for the sale of goods are relaxed a bit. They are covered next week in this course, but they are covered under the Uniform Commercial Code. But this week, in week 3, we are looking at the full set of contract law that applies for real estate and for services. And here's a checklist that you could use to see if you wanted a contract to be considered made. If your client came in and said, "Don't I have a binding contract?" you could use this checklist. Or if you had a client come in who said, "I want to wiggle out of a contract," you could use this as well. Chapter 11 starts the formation of a contract, and the first thing that has to happen is there has to be an offer that's made and an acceptance that matches that offer. Has to exactly match the offer in the case of contracts for services and real estate. We will be talking about the concept of a unilateral versus a bilateral contract. A unilateral contract is one that gets accepted simply by doing the act that has been requested. And here's a fairly famous man, the pillow guy, Mike Lindell, who went public and said if anyone could prove him wrong that the 2020 presidential election was stolen, he would pay them $5 million. And he worded it very carefully, and sure enough, somebody proved him wrong. And the law of contracts would say, at least, that he owes $5 million to that person. Whether he will actually pay it or not is another story. Here's an example of a CPA exam question that you might see. There are many of these scattered throughout this course, but here the question is about a laser printer, a case of paper, and an extra cartridge. And Paul says, uh, I'd like those. And the seller says, okay, that'll be $200, but no paper and no extra cartridge thrown in for that 200. That's just for the printer itself. Uh, if that's what has happened, an offer to buy, and then that kind of an acceptance, what's the answer? The answer is that there has been a rejection of the offer and a counter offer made. In this day and age, many contracts, if not most contracts, are made electronically. You can see this case example is one application of the traditional law of contracts to an electronic commerce transaction. And in this case, Samsung, who, by the way, seems to get in trouble a lot with their electronic contracts, was found not to have put a valid arbitration clause in their electronic contract. Just sending an email can be an acceptance of a contract. Here's an example of that. This is also covered in your PowerPoint slides. If you look at your checklist, in addition to an offer and acceptance, there has to be legal consideration, and we will be going over some examples of that. It's usually money is legally valid consideration, but sometimes it can be more than that. Here's a classic example that you will often see in an exam. Kelly has a 3-year-old laptop, and Jeff offers Kelly $1,000 for that, and Kelly accepts. Pretty good deal for a 3-year-old laptop. If a dispute arises, the answer here is B as in boy. Uh, Courts never, ever get into the business of questioning the adequacy of consideration. You may think it's common sense that no laptop is likely worth $1,000, but courts don't care. All they want to know is it legal consideration, and $1,000 cash is legal consideration. And think about it. If they got into judging the value of things, the world would come to a stop. Another item on our checklist is that the persons entering into the contract both have to have capacity, which we take for granted, but sometimes people lack that. Here's an example of someone who probably did not have the mental capacity to enter into a contract. Minors are MINORS are considered a special category of people, and if you're a minor under 18, the presumption is you do not have the capacity to think through the consequences of a contract. Sometimes the law will step in and say, we don't care if you've entered into a otherwise legally binding contract or not. We just think certain things should not be the subject of a contract, like stopping your child from marrying someone. Here's another one that's very much in the news now. Contracts that restrict your ability to go out and make a living because you would be competing with a former employer. They are very much the subject of dispute now. And here's your next extra credit opportunity on that topic for 2 points added to your first exam by Sunday night, March 31 at 11:59. Send me a Canvas mail message. Google this and tell me when the Federal Trade Commission is expected to come out with its ruling on whether non-compete agreements should be banned. The Federal Trade Commission is supposed to be there to promote competition, and so that's pretty easy for you to do. Look it up. Tell me when the prediction is for their rule to come out. Here's another item from our checklist, and that is whether you, as the person who's trying to get out of it, might be able to raise a defense. A classic defense is a mistake, and we'll be looking at that. Bilateral versus unilateral. Were you under duress? Hint, it's very hard to get out of a contract by saying you were under duress. Did the contract have to be in writing? That's the law there is for some reason called the statute of frauds. Here is someone who somehow or another gets in the news all the time about breaching contracts. A NFL player, Antonio Brown. I don't know if he's still playing or not. If I were the owner or the general manager of an NFL team, I'd be very wary of hiring this guy because he seems to breach every contract that he enters into. The goal of a contract is to be done with it, to get what you wanted and get the other side what they wanted and have it discharged. Here are the ways that you discharge a contract. Usually it's the upper right-hand corner by performance, but we will be looking at the other ways as well. If a contract is breached, that triggers something called damages. Here are the various types of damages. Stop, pause. We'll be looking at those. Usually the only people who care about a contract are the parties who actually signed it, but sometimes there can be third parties, and we'll be looking at that. And that's the subject of a video that I did that's in the learning activities. Those are all very short. Those may well be tested on the first exam as well, which opens on March 28th at 5 p.m. That's Thursday, and closes on Sunday, March 31st at 11:59 p.m. Here is our calendar. Today is the 25th, and again, the first exam closes at 5 or opens at 5 on Thursday, closes Sunday the 31st at 11:59. On Wednesday, the first set of CPA client consultation simulations open. There are already several that I have seen there, so good for you for getting those done. Check those out. Those could very well be tested on the first exam, so please watch all of those and look at the other things that are due on Sunday night as well.